What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over sort of a generic beginner healer build for pretty much any class in the game. So very similar to our beginner DPS build and the beginner tank build. This particular build is not really centered around a single class. Yes, I'm on a sorcerer, but this is just sort of to show you guys the gear itself, as well as explain a little bit behind what you should be doing as you're preparing a healer for endgame PvE. Now, what your endgame is considered, whether that's just vet dungeons, vet hard mode dungeons, or DLC dungeons, or all the way up to vet DLC trials, that's going to really, kind of impact what you should be doing as a healer. 4-man dungeons, generally speaking, as you get progressively more and more into dungeons, they tend to lean a little bit less heavily on healers. It's really going to be more vet trials where you see healers very often. A lot of dungeons nowadays can be completed with 1 tank and 3 DPS, so we're talking about healers and kind of what you want to do in this sort of beginner stage here. It's really going to be sort of preparing you for the vet trials process itself. So that's kind of what this build is going to, well, not really a build, but kind of this video is going to be about. What are the sets that you can grab as a base game player in preparation for vet trials? So yes, we are going to be assuming that we only have access to base game things. That's either overland sets or base game dungeons or base game trials, and part of that is actually quite limiting for healers, because a lot of your best sets, your Orbs Guidance, Olorime, Spell Powder Gear, those all come from DLC dungeons or trials. So there is a bit of a limitation here as to what sort of sets that you're able to run, but hopefully this video will kind of explain everything for you guys who are starting to dip your toes into being a healer in endgame PvE in ESO. So, like the other beginner videos, again, this is fairly class agnostic. We'll just be strictly going over mostly gear. We'll be going over a CP300 setup, and then I'll also talk a little bit about skills, because healers, generally speaking, will be using a lot more kind of generic class agnostic skills compared to class specific skills like a DPS might be. So we will be talking about the different skills that you do want to have if you are intending on becoming a healer. So starting things off here first with gear. So again, we are assuming that we're just playing straight base game. So base game dungeons and overland sets and craftable sets are the only sets that we're going to be able to run here. And again, the whole point of this is to kind of make yourself ready for vet trials. So the gear here is, again, fairly limited because we're only assuming base game stuff. We assume we're not able to transmute things or anything like that. The good thing though is that a lot of the Monster Helm sets are, or I should say the strongest Monster Helm set is a base game set. It's Bogdan and Nightflame. This does come from a fairly difficult dungeon. I believe this comes from Elden Hollow 2, so it's a little bit of a difficult dungeon. So if you're not able to get Bogdan and Nightflame, another good option would be to get Sentinel of Rukugams, which comes from Darkshade Caverns 1. So you have 2 pretty strong healer set options in the base game already. So either picking up Bogdan or Rukugams is definitely a good option here, just starting off here. Nightflame gives you a lot stronger heal than Rukugams does, but Rukugams also gives stamina back when it heals as well. So really nice for overall stamina sustain. So those are the 2 Monster Helm sets that you're going to want to try to pick up here as a beginner healer. If you don't want to pick up a full Monster Helm set, maybe you can't do Elden Hollow 2 just yet, then you can just run 2 different Monster Helm set pieces, preferably with either Magicka regen or max Magicka bonuses. So something like one piece, what's called Shadowrend, and then 1 piece Bogdan for the max Magicka, and then the Magicka regen bonus. That's perfectly fine as well. So you do have a couple of options here, but I would recommend trying to pick up either Bogdan or Rukugams just starting off here. The first set's going to be Infallible Aether here. So again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you're kind of limited to what set you're able to run, because a lot of the stronger sets that you want to run in vet trials is actually gated by DLCs. So Olorime, for example, is stuck behind Summerset, and Orbs Guidance is stuck behind Dragon Bones. So if you do want to end up doing vet trials, I do recommend taking a look at getting those DLCs, especially if you want to get really, really deep into the endgame stuff here. But Infallible Aether, while it is a base game set, it does come from the various Craglorn trials. The good thing is you can farm this on normal, so I have it all on the armor pieces here, so that way you don't have to worry about getting gold jewelry or anything like that, just because the second set, as you can see here, Worm Cult, is a dungeon set, so it's a little bit easier to obtain. You will only be able to get purple jewelry, or if you're lucky and the golden vendor does happen to have gold worm, then you can obviously buy it using gold or AP, depending on what you want to spend it on. So those are the 2 sets that you should be picking up as a healer in preparation for vet trials. Both of these sets are also really good for dungeons as well. IA not quite as much, I should say worm not quite as much, just because there is a chance that your 2 DPS might be stamina, and so worm is pretty much not very strong. It's going to be useful for you in the tank. So in that instance, you know, it's a little bit tricky here, but those 2 sets are probably going to be the best sets for you to pick up if you only have access to the base game sets. The other set would be Sanctuary, but as I touched upon on a lot of my other healing videos, Sanctuary is not really used very often in sort of endgame PvE stuff. So while you could potentially grab that set, you're not really going to be using it too much. So it's kind of up to you whether you want to do Worm Cult or Sanctuary. Worm Cult's going to have a little bit more utility in the endgame. Yes, magic DPS are becoming rarer and rarer as you start going progressively higher and higher in sort of content and in sort of overall difficulty, but it's still pretty useful just because it also helps out tanks and healers. So those are the 2 sets here. In terms of traits and enchants, they're pretty much exactly what you would expect from a healer. So your typical meta healer traits and enchants would be divines on your small pieces, and then prismatics on your large with either infused or divines. Kind of up to you which ones you want to go for. Jewelry pieces, again, we're assuming that you're not able to transmute things, so arcane is pretty much what you're stuck with. And then enchants, either magic regen or spell damage, depending on what you want to go for. So again, I like to go for 2000 regen and spell damage before buffs get put out. So you can see here that I'm sitting pretty nicely here on a Sork with 2286 spell damage and 2261 magic regen. This is a pretty good enchant setup here for me with Worm Cult and Infallible Aether. You do get the additional spell damage from both of them, and you get that additional magic regen from Worm Cult. So that really helps out kind of padding up your numbers a little bit here. Still going Resto Destro, so you still want the Restoration Staff and a Lightning Staff. Now, there is one unique Restoration Staff that you can get in the base game, and that's going to be a Master's Restoration Staff. Not particularly useful anymore, just because Healing Springs is no longer your primary heal anymore. It's going to be energy orbs, so it's not really useful. So it's better off if you don't have access to things like Asylum Restoration Staff or the Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff or anything like that, just to double down on one of your sets, either Worm Cult or Infallible Aether here. We have it infused with a weapon damage enchant. You can do powered, you can do defensive. There's a lot of different traits you can run here. Infused and powered are typically the ones that I see used most often, with charged being a close third. For your enchants, I like to stick with weapon damage enchant just to give myself a little bit stronger heals. You can run a shock damage enchant if you'd like to help with concussed uptime, which helps off balance uptime. You can go with Absorb Magicka if you feel like you need to sustain. So a couple of options there. You can go with weakening if you want to reduce the damage incoming to the group. And the back bar is a lightning staff infused with a shock damage enchant. Infused is pretty much going to be the only really good option for your lightning staff back bar. His other traits not particularly useful as your destruction staff back bar, but you definitely want to have that shock damage enchant here on one of your 2 bars, just because you do want to get that concussed uptime to get that off balance uptime. It's not going to be very useful for magic DPS unless they're using like a heavy attack build, but for stamina DPS, because pretty much all stamina DPS do have the exploiter passive, it does allow them to do a lot more damage to enemies that are off balance. The 10% additional damage done modifier. So it's really important they get pretty good off-balance uptime, and the shock damage enchant is pretty much the most consistent way to apply concuss, which is necessary to set things off-balance with lightning blockade. So that's kind of the general rule here. Again, this build is kind of geared more towards preparing you for vet trials, less so for vet dungeons, because again, once you start getting into vet dungeons, you'll find that it's a lot easier to run the dungeons with 1 tank and 3 DPS, just because of the power creep and because how easy the dungeons have gotten over the years once you kind of know all the mechanics and are able to manage your damage pretty well as a DPS. So IA, Worm Cult, or Sanctuary, those are the 3 sets that you're able to run here, and then for your monster helm, either Bogdan or Rukugams are the 2 best helms that you can pick up as a healer. In terms of character sheets, I'm a Dark Elf just because I just picked up my Sork, and I was doing some DPS testing earlier, so I was a Dark Elf here. But you can do any of the magically inclined races. Breton is going to be the strongest just because of the cost reduction. You get that 7% cost reduction to magic abilities, which is really, really nice there. But you can go with any of the magically inclined races, so High Elves or the Dark Elves if you want to do some DPSing on the side, which is obviously something that you might want to consider doing. The healers should be doing a little bit of damage, even in dungeons and trials. You're doing a little bit of damage here and there. So it's kind of important to be able to do that. For your traits, all points into magicka. You can put a couple of points into health if you so desire. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. You can see here that with our max health, I'm on a Sork, so I do have some additional health from the Daedric pet passive. So it's a little bit inflated here, but we're sitting at 18.7k, and if I actually desummon my pet here, so you guys can see what my base health is at. Sit resets. We're sitting at 17.6 with prismatic enchants on 3 heavy large pieces. So pretty nice overall. So you don't necessarily need to put any points into health, but you certainly can do so if you'd like. For a very long time when I was learning how to heal, I actually had 10 points into health, which helped me survive a little bit more. Obviously now I'm able to run all points into magicka here, but as a healer it's kind of important that you end up getting a decent amount of survivability, whether that comes from learning the mechanics and learning to avoid those mechanics, or just having a little bit more health. A little bit more padding there, so you can take a little bit more hits, 1 or 2 more hits there. It's kind of up to you how you get that survivability. So if you're just starting off, I do recommend trying to get around 20k health or so. Might be a little bit overkill, but once you get comfortable with that, you can kind of bring that back down to around 18k or 17k or so. Before you have Evan and Minor Toughness active. So definitely work on your survivability, whether that's getting a little bit more health or adding in learning the mechanics and learning how to avoid mechanics in trials and dungeons. Mundus Stone, either the Atronach or the Ritual. The Atronach will give you additional magicka regen, the Ritual will give you stronger heals, and that allows you to basically use your jewelry enchants to make up for the deficits otherwise. So for example, with the Atronach Mundus, you can instead shift your enchants over to spell damage instead. So that's kind of how that works, and then with Ritual, you can shift your enchants to regen instead. We are a vampire, that just gives us some additional magicka regen. You don't have to be a vampire. The thing with healers is you should be able to fully sustain your healing output, your abilities, without needing to heavy attack very often. So whether you need vampirism or not is really going to be dependent on how well you're able to sustain as a healer. So if you are not a vampire and you feel like your sustain is fine, you don't need to run vampirism at all. But if you feel like you need additional regen, then you can be a vampire if you'd like. The downside of being a vampire is you have lower health regen and you take more damage from fire damage. So just kind of balance that out. Most healers that I know actually do not need to be a vampire to fully sustain their sort of healing rotation, so to speak. Healers don't really have a rotation, but they're able to fully sustain their job without the vampirism. So that's kind of a good goal to shoot for. Start off without vampirism, and kind of learn where to put in your heavy attacks to get the sustain and things like that. And then for food, Craglorn Hard Modes fillet or Witchmother's Potent Brew. So you get the max magicka, you get the max health, and you get the magicka regen. So really nice food here with Craglorn Hard Modes fillet. The other option would be to run Olorime Red Frothgar, which I do have in my inventory. Let's see here. Olorime's Red Frothgar here. So while this is, you do need to have access to Orsidium in order to get the recipe. I don't think you can buy the recipe off of guild traders. You can buy the actual food itself. So this gives you max health and magicka regen. It doesn't give you any sort of max magicka. So your heals will be a little bit weaker if you are using Olorime's Red Frothgar, but you'll have a lot more health. I highly recommend starting off with the Red Frothgar, as if you're just starting off as a healer. Gives you the additional survivability, gives you the additional sustain, and then once you feel comfortable with what you got to do, what kind of the healer beats are in a trial or in a dungeon, then you can transition over to something like Craglorn Hard fillet or Witchmother's Potent Brew. Some healers even decide to go with blue food because they don't feel like they don't need additional sustain. So if that happens to be you, then by all means you can go ahead and use blue food as well for the max health and max magicka. But I highly recommend starting off with Olorime's Red Frothgar, just kind of as a generic beginner healer food, just because of that additional survivability that you get. Moving on to skills. So again, I'm on a Sork, so obviously it's going to be dependent on what class you are healing as. So definitely check out videos from either myself or other content creators to kind of see what sort of class skills you should have on hand. But I'll really quickly go over kind of the general skills you should have on your bar as a healer. So the two most important skills that you need to have as a healer are going to be Combat Prayer and Energy Orbs. The role of the healer in ESO is not necessarily to heal. That's obviously part of your job, make sure nobody dies. But a big part of it is also managing buffs and debuffs, and it's kind of being a support. Tanks and healers in ESO, while they do their classical MMO jobs, tanks are meat sponges, healers heal. The other half of your job is kind of supporting the group and kind of helping out your DPS, do as much damage as they possibly can. And Common Prayer and Energy Orbs are going to be the quintessential abilities you need to have as a healer. Combat Prayer, because of that Minor Berserk, gives you that 8% additional damage done. very, very strong. It's probably the only way most classes are able to get Minor Berserk. The only class that's able to get Minor Berserk by itself now is going to be the Wardens, but they do have to give up one ability slot to do so, so sometimes Warden builds will not be running that one ability. So it's really important to have Comet Prayer down and learn to use it pretty much on cooldown, every 8 seconds or so. You want to get as much Comet Prayer uptime as you possibly can. Energy Orb serves two purposes. The first is a overall general heal. It is actually one of the strongest heals in the game, probably second only to maybe Healing Springs and Illustrious Healings when it's stacked on each other. In terms of just raw healing done per second. Outside of like spamming obviously your burst heal, this is going to be a very powerful healing move. So as long as it's out on the field, it's going to be healing every half second. So if you decide to do the math and make it a 1 second tick, it ends up healing in this instance under this build about 1700 health. For comparison, Illustrious Healing heals about 2000 health every second. So this is a really, really strong skill just in terms of raw healing potential, but it also provides a combustion synergy which gives 3960 magic or stamina to whoever activates the synergy. Basically, it just gives your DPS additional sustain, gives your tanks additional sustain as well. And that's really important to maximize overall DPS, because in order to maximize DPS in ESO, you pretty much have to run a light attack rotation. There are a few heavy attack builds, particularly for Sorks, that are able to do very high DPS, but in order to really maximize DPS, light attack rotations are pretty much going to be the norm for the other 11 other DPS specs. So being able to provide additional resources through energy orbs is very, very important overall. The other move that I really recommend you have on your bar somewhere is going to be either Illustrious Healing or Healing Springs, which is the other morph of this skill here. The advantage of running Illustrious Healing and Healing Springs is that it stacks on top of each other. So if you cast Illustrious Healing 3 times, you actually have 3 stacks of that heal going at the same time. So you have 3 ticks of that 2000 health going at one time, totaling about 6,000 per tick. So it's really nice when you need to layer heals down and get a lot of healing done over a wide area. It's actually a pretty wide area. It's an 8-meter radius. So this is a very powerful kind of quasi-burst AoE heal. So really, really nice to have on hand. I consider it to be a skill that pretty much most healers, all healers, should have on their bars. The other skills that a healer should have access to are going to be Blockade of Storms for the off bounce, Elemental Drain for the minor magic steal, and Overflowing Altar for the minor life steal. Now some classes do have access to ways to get minor magic steal and minor life steal. So for example, Warden Healers, you guys have, I'm blanking on the name, but it's a Vines move, it's a green balance move that applies minor life steal. And Nightblade, you have Debilitate, which gives out minor magic steal as well. So depending on your group composition, you might not need these 2 skills, but you should definitely have these on hand because these 2 buffs are very important. Minor magic steal for the sustain and minor life steal because it's actually an additional heal, so you might as well make use of it. For your ultimate, definitely get Aggressive Warhorn. This is the strongest support ultimate that you can use as a support role. That Major Force is quite powerful, so definitely get Aggressive Warhorn. And the final skill that you should have as a healer, and this is going to vary depending on your class, is going to be your class burst heal. So for a Sork, it'd be Twilight Matriarch. For a Templar, it would be either Breath of Life or the clap heal. I'm blanking on it. The second skill on that skill line. For Wardens, it would be your Mushroom heal or Budding Seeds. So it's really important to have a burst heal somewhere on your bar. While you can use Comet Prayer as a quasi-burst heal, it's not going to be quite as strong as the Twilight Matriarch. So you can see here, it's healing for 7232, compared to Comet Prayer, which heals 4946. So obviously you can use Comet Prayer as a burst heal. It's not that bad of a burst heal, but if you really need that immediate burst for your tank, just got hit by a heavy attack, forgot to block it or something, and they're at like 10% health, you want to have this burst heal in case of emergencies. The key thing here is to not overuse your burst heal. So you shouldn't be using it as your primary heal. Your primary heal should be coming from Comet Prayer and Energy Orbs, from the utility it provides as well as the pretty nice healing that they both do. Your burst heal should be reserved for emergencies when you need that burst heal. So again, if your tank hits 10% because they were dumb and forgot to block an attack, that's when you would use the burst heal. Or if you have to kind of like heal somebody out of any sort of like healing debuff, for example, Ice Prisons and Lakestes, that's when you use your burst heal. Then beyond that, your kind of other skills are going to be more centered around kind of supporting the group or supporting your own sustain. So for example, Templars will be using Channeled Focus to get some additional magicka back. Sorks here will be using Dark Deal to get your or not Dark Deal, the other morph of Dark Deal, Dark Conversion to get some magicka back. And then, you might be running Shadow Silk for the Black Widow synergy, which is still a very, very powerful synergy. So a lot of different flexibility here. Again, check out the other healer videos that I have, or healer builds that other content creators have made, like Outcast or Fear Turbo, to kind of get a sense of what skills you should have on hand. Now for champion points, so we will be going over a CP 300 setup. I say CP 300 because that is pretty much when you should be good to go for Vet Trials content. That basically means you have all the max resources leveled up, and so you don't have to really worry about being below a certain resource pool or something like that. That gives you 100 points to put across your different constellation colors. The most important thing for healers is going to be Arcanist, so just pump all 100 points in Arcanist. Easy peasy, green CPs, done. Blue CPs, split them between Elfborn and Blessed, so just do 50 Blessed, 50 Elfborn. Nothing else really matters for healers. The other nodes are more DPS oriented, so just make sure to get Elfborn, make sure to get Blessed. The healing done, and obviously critical heals is very important to pick up. And red CPs, this is going to be the typical Asian balanced approach. So you have, I believe it is 27 into Hardy, 27 into Ellie Defender, and then you have 23 Thickskin and 23 Ironclad, and there is your 100 points. Boom, we are done. So that would be a CP 300 setup. So really easy for green CPs, just dump everything into Arcanist. Blue CPs also very easy, split them even Steven between Blessed and Elfborn, and then red CPs for the balanced approach, 27 Hardy, Ellie Defender, 23 Thick-Skinned, and Ironclad. That's pretty much it for this build. Again, it's very healers. If you only have access to the base game things, it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to kind of fit in, because you'll never be able to wear Olorime, you will never be able to wear Yorvals, and so you will never be able to get any of the really nice, unique healer staves, so the Black Rose Prison Staff or the Asylum Staff. That doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to do Vet Trials very effectively, but it does limit your overall capabilities, because you don't have access to certain sets that are very important. So for example, if you want to just run dungeons, typically speaking, the healer will be running either Spell Power Cure or Olorime, and you can't run those if you don't have access to either Imperial City or Summerset respectively. So I highly recommend, if you do intend on becoming a healer and maining a healer, to really focus, try to find a way to get those DLCs, because you do need those sets. Olorime for the Major Courage. The Major Courage sets are pretty much locked behind those DLCs, so you gotta get those if you do intend on being a healer. It limits your flexibility a lot if you don't have access to those DLCs. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys have any questions about how to get started in healing, I am not really a healer main. I've healed occasionally from time to time, but it's not really something that I am necessarily the best at. But I do know several people who would be more than happy to give advice over to healing. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to leave down in the comment section below, and I'll ask around and get back to you with a sufficient answer. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.